Well, happy Sabbath, family. We're together again without being together. I miss you, and I really, really look forward to being able to shake your hand, have a hug, be able to look you in the eye in the church lobby very soon. I hope it will not be very many weeks. We appreciate, though, that our church community is helping to do each of our parts to try to shorten this period, this time of concern. We are not out of the woods. We certainly probably have not actually reached the peak of impact for the this novel coronavirus in our country and certainly in our world. It's time to join in prayer for people in areas that are really hardest hit right now, and to be thinking about some of the areas that have little or no health system infrastructure in some parts of the world. We need to be, as followers of Jesus, we need to be tuned to the feelings and the life experience of all of our brothers and sisters everywhere in the world. Every one of our Lord's creatures that could be suffering in any way, that should impact our hearts because it impacts our Lord's heart. I thank you, Dan and Jenny, for that wonderful worship time with you. It's, when we do get back together, there's going to be aspects of this experience that some people are going to miss. I like the relaxed intimacy of being able to join you in a home setting like we have the last couple of weeks and this week. Thank you so much. Beautiful music, nice time for the kids. We're also fortunate that you shared a little bit with our young people, and we welcome you kids this Sabbath wherever you are. It is okay with me. It might not be okay with your parents, but it's okay with me if you need to stand up and stretch or run around and be exactly whatever age you are. Get some energy out, and you can fly right by and find the screen again when you get interested. But I'm going to start out by remembering when I was just about 4 years old. When I was 4 years old, I used to like to sleep with a nightlight. I wasn't particularly afraid of the dark, but I was afraid of things that could be in the dark. And I didn't want to hurt myself if I needed to get up and go someplace. I can remember one night when I was in bed asleep, and my room was at the far end of the house from my mother's room. And I had my nightlight on, my little tiny nightlight, just beside my dresser, and down about as tall as my knees, where there was an electrical outlet that my little Mickey Mouse nightlight was plugged into. It wasn't very bright, but I could make out everything in the room with that, and it made it so that I knew that I was the only one there, and there wasn't anyone there that didn't belong there. But one night, when I woke up and was looking at my nightlight, just as I was looking at it and thinking I might go back to sleep, just as I was thinking, well, maybe I need to get up and go down the hall to the bathroom before I go back to sleep, just then all the lights went out, including the street light that shone through the shade that was partly see-through in my window. And everything was pitch black. There was no battery-operated clocks. There was nothing. It was so dark that when I held my hand up right in front of my face, I could not see it. It was just like I wasn't holding it there. And my eyes were creating little specks of what looked to me like blue light. I did not understand yet why it is that our eyes do that when we're in the pitch black darkness, but I couldn't tell if those little tiny little pinprick sized bursts of bluish light, I couldn't tell if that was something in my room or not, and I didn't know about it, so I was a little worried. But while I was laying there thinking, now how am I going to get up and find my way to the door and then down the hall to the bathroom without stepping on something or bumping into something? How am I going to manage that? I remembered that I had been given for my birthday a nice silver flashlight with a red cap that screwed on over the batteries, and that I knew right where on the side of my flashlight there was a red plastic switch to slide it forward, and I knew what would happen if I turned it on. So I remembered I had put that right under my bed, right under the edge of my bed, on the end of the bed where I put my head when I went to bed. So I climbed out of bed, kept my one hand on the bed so I could tell where I was, and I reached under the bed and I got my flashlight. And when I turned it on, it was so bright. That little tiny light was so bright when I turned it on, because my eyes had gotten used to being in a dark room, and then it had gone completely dark. And when I turned it on, it was such a comfort. I could easily point it right at the floor and find my way down the hall. And then when I was finished, I found my way back into bed. I climbed back into bed and held my little flashlight. And I went under the covers and put the covers over my head and put the flashlight under there and thought, oh, this is so much fun. I have a little tent. And then I got sleepy. Then I said, I'm going to keep that flashlight right here in my hand, right next to me with my arms to my side. I'm going to go to sleep holding on to my flashlight even when it's turned off. Well, I think that flashlight is such a good illustration for that passage that we read from Psalm 112, that we can know, no matter how dark it is, that light will be able to dawn. Light dawns in the darkness for the upright. He is gracious, merciful, and righteous. Here's that same passage from the New International Version. It says, even in darkness, light draws for the upright. This is Psalm 112, starting with verse 4 and reading down through verse 7. Even in darkness, light draws for the upright, for those who are gracious and compassionate and righteous. Good will come to those who are generous and lend freely, who conduct their affairs with justice. You know, right now, it's important that people be compassionate, because there's going to be people in every community in our country, and probably all over the world, maybe every community in the world, there are going to be people who they don't have work, because with everybody staying inside and not going places and doing things, not taking trips, not going to restaurants, not buying certain things that they don't need, many things, not going to any sporting events or concerts or anything. There are going to be many people who the people they work for cannot afford to pay them when they're not working, and that's going to be a big problem. So it's going to be important, anybody who has what they need, to be generous and to be compassionate. And that is what it is, partly, to be righteous, not just to be fair. That's not all there is, just being fair. Well, I've done everything that I was supposed to. Everything I said I'd do, I've done. I've obeyed all the laws. I have done what I'm supposed to do to earn my living. But that's not where it ends for people that follow Jesus. And let's do the whole passage, 4 through 7. Even in darkness, light dawns for the upright, for those who are gracious and compassionate and righteous. Verse 5, good will come to those who are generous and lend freely, who conduct their affairs with justice. Surely the righteous will never be shaken. Surely the righteous will never be shaken. They will be remembered forever. They will have no fear of bad news. Their hearts are steadfast, trusting in the Lord. So the righteous will never be shaken. And I think that even if it's a stretch for some of us to think of ourselves as righteous, I think that it's speaking about not people that are letter perfect, people that are as if they had never been part of a fallen species like ours, but people that are those that hunger and thirst after righteousness, people that want to follow Jesus and are doing their best, people that want to be the way they were created to be. For those kind of people, and I hope we can each number ourselves among those people. They will not be able to be shaken, even in times that are frightening, even if things go wrong for themselves and their family and their neighbors. And they will have no fear of bad news. Now let's be honest with ourselves. We don't have to be honest with each other because we can't see each other's reactions looking around the church today. But let's just be honest with ourselves. Any of us have any fear of some bad news? Or when we're hearing bad news this last week, have any of you had any moments of fear? We're told that we do not have to have fear of bad news, that in fact, not just prescriptively, but descriptively, our hearts are steadfast, trusting in the Lord. Our hearts are steadfast. Even in darkness, light shines for the upright. This reminds me so much of that psalm just 7 chapters later, Psalm 119. In verse 105 of the 119th Psalm, we read, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, and a light unto my path." How similar is that to my dark bedroom and that dark hallway back when I was 4 years old, being able to get my little silver flashlight with the red lens cap and the red switch and sliding it on, and it was a lamp to my feet, and it lit up my path. I did not have to worry. You know, I think that there's a tradition, at least among many Seventh-day Adventists, and maybe some Christians and other Bible readers that are not Seventh-day Adventist. I think there's a tradition of thinking of the Word in that passage, Psalm 119, as the Bible, and I think that is partly the case. I think that the Bible is very helpful. We can find reassurance in the Bible. But the Bible, I think, is not the complete fulfillment of that symbol. In fact, I think there's something about the Word of God in John chapter 1, the very beginning of the book of John. We read, "In the beginning was the Word." Now that word has a capital W in many translations. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and the life was the light of all mankind. So the life that is in the Word, which I believe represents Christ, in him, divinity itself, absolute, actual divinity itself, the source of life, all life is in him, and it is that life and he who is the source of life that is our light. And the Bible is one of the ways that we are guided and comforted, a very important way, but there's a very direct way. We're told that God's law, and that's not just the Ten Commandments, God's law is written on our hearts at a certain point in our relationship with him, in our study of his teachings, in our following him, our life of having our character shaped more in his likeness, more like the example that he gave when he was here, and his path was intersecting with ours on this planet. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There's a passage that I haven't liked very well, and I'm going to be vulnerable, and maybe this is incriminating. It says more about me, of course, than the passage. But there's one verse that it's bothered me many times when people have read it. I'm not criticizing the passage, and I'm not sure exactly why it bothers me. It's just rubbed me wrong too many times. That's Romans 8, verse 28. I know it's brought courage and comfort to many people, but from the time I heard it, maybe it's the context in which I heard it the first few times or something. You know that verse. It says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." You know, let's be honest, there have been some ways that have been less wise than others that has been used. For instance, I do not want to hear this verse ever again at some young person's funeral. That it doesn't comfort me when I'm mourning, and I have seen people respond to being told, well, you know, this will all work together for the good. When you've lost your child, or you've lost your spouse, when you've lost somebody you care about, when you have lost your health, hearing that works together for your good seems very, very difficult. So maybe it's not always the time to bring out Romans 8:28. But you know, it really could be. I'm open to the fact that it really doesn't matter at all whether or not I happen to like it. Could it be important enough a passage to, whether I like it or not, deserve to be included in our scriptures? I think so, even if I haven't liked it. But what if we keep an eye on Romans 8:28? All things work together for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. What if we just keep an eye on Romans 8:28 while we consider Matthew chapter 5, verse 45. It says in Matthew 5:45, "He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good." There's another reference to light. The sun is certainly our major source of light in our earthly life. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. Now remember, we're reading Matthew 5:45, keeping one eye on Romans 8:28. We know that all things work together for good for those that love him. Matthew 5:45, "He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous." Is there any way that accepting both of these passages as valid and important could yield a reality in which we could know that all things God works for the good of the righteous and the unrighteous? Can we believe that? Is that too much of a stretch? Can we know that in all things God works for the good, not just of the righteous, but also of the unrighteous? That God causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, that in all things God sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. And is it fair to say that all things work together for good for those who have been called according to his purpose, whether or not they've accepted their calling, since we know that according to Matthew 22:14, many are called, but few are chosen? So is that too much of a stretch? Can we go that far and say, well, maybe that's possible, that all things might work together for good, even for those that we would not number among the righteous, or even wouldn't number themselves among the righteous? If we experience ourselves disliking this idea, then I think it's a pretty good bet that we'd better hope this integrated statement is true, because that would be the clearest demonstration, I think, that we are, in fact, among the unrighteous, that we are without doubt evil rather than good, because we know that the way to tell if we are followers of Jesus, redeemed by his blood and undergoing all the processes of sanctification, of being made suitable for an endless heavenly future, then we will embody love for others. At least that's the direction we're heading. And we'll love even those who try, albeit in vain, to be our enemies. Even loving our enemies, if we have the Spirit of God within us, then we will love, because God is love. And that being the case, we won't be the kind of people who rejoice in justice when people get what's coming to them. Well, you're unrighteous, you're getting whatever karma you deserve, you're getting the just rewards of your nonsense. No, we will not be people who, when we see that somebody comes at the last hour and they labor for 5 minutes before the end of the workday and they get the same wages that we get. I think that parable was told to put us on notice that that Christ's real followers that are really having their hearts changed by him are not people who are eager to see people get what's coming to them unless what's coming to them is very good. Could Romans 8:28 possibly be important and relevant right now for all of our human family everywhere in the world? Within the past week, our COVID-19 pandemic has been identified by many important thinkers as the single most significant historic disruption in our world since World War II. Do you think that's a stretch? I don't know. It's hard when we're in the middle of something to see what we're in the middle of. Think of the difference between having a storm system come in from behind you and just drop buckets and buckets and buckets of rain right on you and then blow past, and then you watch it go across the valley and go on to the hills above beyond you, and you can see it as this dark cloud in the sky, and it looks so different when it's far away. I don't know if looking back at this period of being sheltered in our homes, of hearing daily death tolls from this pandemic, I don't know how significant and how changing it's going to be in the long run. Is it even conceivable that such a monumental event, though, as what's happening now, is going to leave our world just exactly like it was only a few months ago, just unchanged? I think it's fair to say that that's extremely improbable. In the 19th century, many people believed that opening their windows to let in the night air was allowing something called miasma to enter their homes. The miasmatic theory, as it was sometimes called, the miasmatic theory, is an obsolete medical theory that believed that diseases like cholera, chlamydia, or even bubonic plague, the Black Death, were caused by some sort of miasma. Now, that word miasma is from the ancient Greek word miasma, meaning pollution, a noxious form of bad air. They also referred to miasma as night air, N-I-G-H-T, like nighttime rather than daytime, night air. According to that theory, the origin of epidemics, and if it had been this epidemic, this probably during that era would have been perceived as due to miasma, like they thought epidemics were, emanating from some sort of rotting organic matter somewhere or something. Though the miasmatic theory is typically associated with the spread of disease, some of the early 19th century scholars even proposed that the theory extended to certain other conditions as well. For example, there were actually people, serious people, who believed that we could become obese by inhaling too many food odors. I'm glad that's not true. I'm glad we've gone past that. If the placebo effect is robust in us, maybe it could actually still play out for some of us if we believed it. But I think we're needing to actually eat those calories in order to wear them later. The miasmatic theory was accepted from ancient times in Europe and also in China. Although after 1880, that theory was abandoned by scientists and physicians in favor of germ theories of disease. Many non-scientists for years, maybe some people for the rest of their lives in certain generations, still held on to their beliefs about miasma. But the winds of change in that belief were blowing. Along came a health reformer who insisted that a certain group of people that I think you and I have heard of a lot, we've heard a lot about it, should be teaching the world, among other wellness practices, to be leaving their windows wide open at night for maximum fresh air. Let me read a quote from Adventist Home, the book Adventist Home, page 148, from the third paragraph on page 148, sleeping rooms should be so arranged as to have a free circulation of air day and night. Now, when that was circulated, there were people who believed that the person writing it, you and I know who that person was writing that, you know what pen that came from, that person was selling out to these dangerous liberal scientists who were questioning the wisdom that they had heard from their grandparents and from their parents about closing the windows. And so there was even conspiracy theory regarding trying to hurt us by having us disregard common sense and opening the window, letting disease in the form of miasma. Well, winds of change are blowing again. Winds that conventional wisdom might regard, much like miasma was regarded, as something that carries the means of our undoing. What if these winds of change are actually life-giving fresh air, allowing humanity to take a series of deep, healing breaths of fresh air, fresh vision, fresh ideas? We're in a hard time right now, and it's very difficult for us to see any silver lining, and because we don't really know how long we're going to be in what kind of status or under what kind of health precautions going forward. We have estimates, and the estimates change, and they change back, and they change again. I think that humility is important even for the people that are needing to remain strong leaders. People that are encouraging confidence need to do that by showing that they're open-minded today, and not that they're so sure that they have to keep changing their story because they say things as proclamations when they're not 100% sure, since nobody really is. Imagine how hard it is for any of us to heal our bodies when we're just too stubborn to take a few weeks off when we feel sick. You know how that is. You run down, you get something, and you just keep pushing and pushing. Even when it's not a pandemic like this, it's still a bad thing, a really bad thing to have pneumonia. And we've a term like walking pneumonia, when people clearly have pneumonia. If you would listen with a stethoscope, you could hear the little crackling sounds that sound like if you wad up paper and then listen to it unwad itself. When the person's breathing in, you can hear that crinkle, crinkle, crackle through the stethoscope. But they keep working. They keep working and getting a little sicker and a little sicker and a little sicker. And they're not going to get well in many cases if they just keep working. Once, though, we take the time off and we heal, we seem to be able to take all kinds of abuse to our health for a while. But when we get just too run down, when our system is just overwhelmed and our batteries are just drained enough, just past the right threshold, we just can't seem to quite turn the corner. If we just take a bit of a time out, our bodies have proven so many times that they can get back to full function, and then once again we can be resilient until something else comes along and abuses us again. And how much good does it do each of us when we're just having a regular year? Even we're not sick necessarily, we're just in our routine. How much good does it do to have a decent vacation, a real vacation? Isn't that healing? Don't we know that there's something healing about a real vacation? Several weeks without working, doesn't it seem to heal us a little in some ways? Now, our ecosystem, the ecosystem of the planet that we're living on, whether we like to imagine that we're not still here and that we've been airlifted out of here, not yet. We're still here, and we have grandparents and great-grandparents and dozens of generations of people that have gone before us that have, instead of investing in this life enough to be good citizens, they've been so convinced that they're about to be out of here, taken to heaven, that we're right at the threshold the very last events. And so some things that are just good stewardship and just good citizenship can be neglected. I don't want us to be those kinds of citizens. Our ecosystems are and the big ecosystem of this world, in many ways, is much like a living human body. Satellite imagery during the past few weeks has already been showing some signs that our ecosystem is having some reprieve from things that are as observable, as tangible, at least in satellite imagery, as air pollution. We know that carbon footprints are being reduced right now. I don't believe that it's going to continue like this on and on and on. No, I don't think that next year at this time we're still going to be reducing our activity like this. I think that it's very likely that in a number of weeks or in just a few months we'll see things that will start churning back to life. And a year from now, if I had to bet on it, I would say, although there will be some changes in the way we do things and the way we feel about some of the things that we may still be doing, we're going to be impacting our ecosystem again in similar manners. There's going to be airplanes in the sky just as much. There's going to be rush hour traffic, unfortunately, but I guess in some ways, fortunately. We have been able to see YouTube videos that are making their way onto Facebook, and people are texting them around, of wild animals that have just been cruising through towns and cities from which they have, for many years, many generations of those species have steered clear of these concrete menace areas. Now they're cruising in like they own the place. Is it possible that even just a little chance to catch up for a few months for our ecosystem could have a significant impact in terms of letting our well-designed, robust ecosystem heal? Is it possible that we could actually see that things actually make a tangible difference, even though it doesn't ever get back to the point we're not going to be logged down like this, or even logged down enough, long enough or to great enough extent to return things to what it looked like with forestation and clean air and clean water and all over the place, and less runoff in the oceans? No, there's still going to be some age left on our ecosystem. But is it possible that just like when you and I finally take just a little while, even a few days, to let our system just get ahead of it a little bit, that our world could play catch up a little, and some of what has happened to compromise our ecosystem could maybe even heal? Is that possible? And is that out of bounds to pray for that? I don't think so. Can you imagine us having had a discussion last summer, say July of 2019, if we were just hanging around at the table in the fellowship room, in the fireside room, after potluck, and we were saying, what would be a good idea? What would we have to do with our huge influence as our great big little church in St. Helena right here on Main Street? What would we have to do to start a meme so we could convince the whole planet to just take a couple months, just everybody stay home and have one great big long overdue Sabbath? Man, what that could do to let the earth catch up a little, to let some species have a chance to come out of the forest for a minute, to just stop belching garbage out of the back of our cars into the atmosphere, and to shut some factories down with enormous smokestacks. And wouldn't it be something if we could convince the world to do that? Maybe we need to write an editorial or something, or make a group message and put it on YouTube and have it go viral, and have all the world leaders at once say, yes, thank you. We're going to have a giant Sabbath for the planet, and just let everybody catch up and heal a little. Stop and take a breather from the kind of living that we've been doing that steps all over people and that just forgets the impact of our behaviors. Wow. Can you imagine the discussion last July, if we'd said that, what kind of odds would you have given that that would actually come about in less than a year, that we'd actually have that happening? Now, I'm sorry that it's coupled with a tragic pandemic, and nothing we say should ever take away from the gravity, the seriousness of people's grief, and the concern, the legitimate concern for the safety of especially our most vulnerable brothers and sisters around the world. But that doesn't undo the fact that there's some other things that are getting undone while we're doing this, and some of those things may actually, looking back, be a matter of all things in the whole working together for good, maybe even for the righteous and the unrighteous. Can you imagine our discussion last summer suggesting having the whole world just taking a break for a couple months to see if our heavenly body, that is our earth, could rest and heal and catch up a bit, since it's been getting overwhelmed and run down with several illnesses at the same time, and it's refused to slow down and just stay home from work. You know, we have some actual counsel in the Word about letting the earth have a chance to catch its breath. It's not even on as large a scope, because it's talking about just a little region at a time, perhaps, and just agricultural regions. But it's multiplied by the fact that the Sabbath for the world, for the earth, for the soil, for the land, was to last an entire year. And I don't think we're going to be giving the earth a break for a year, but maybe since it's most of the earth rather than just a little area in the Middle East, maybe this will have a similar impact. Exodus 23 verses 10 to 11. For 6 years you are to sow your fields and harvest the crops, but during the 7th year let the land lie unplowed and unused. Then the poor among your people may get food from it, and the wild animals may eat what is left. Do the same with your vineyard and your olive grove. Interesting. And here again we have in Leviticus chapter 25, verses 1 through 7. The Lord said to Moses at Mount Sinai, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I am going to give you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord." The land itself, the earth, must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. Interesting. Maybe our ecosystem really should be given a chance to replenish itself in many ways. The world itself, the land itself, needs to have a Sabbath. For 6 years sow your fields, and for 6 years prune your vineyards and gather their crops. But in the 7th year the land is to have a year of Sabbath rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Do not reap what grows of itself, or harvest the grapes of your untended vines. The land is to have a year of rest. Whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year will be food for you, for yourself, your male and female servants, and the hired worker and temporary resident who live among you, as well as your livestock and the wild animals in your land. Whatever the land produces may be eaten. Now I want to add something there, because some of these passages in the things that Moses wrote down, they speak about human beings in a way that I believe we would not speak, and I'm glad we wouldn't. There's a whole study in itself, and we'll undertake that together at some point today to talk about very challenging passages. Very challenging passages, not just in the Old Testament, even in the New Testament, that for some reason, and again, I'm not saying these are easy to explain, but I am saying they can be explained, and we'll revisit it, about treating different kinds of people very differently. Some of the passages that we're reading today, and some passages even in the New Testament, they were used to justify the obscenity of human slavery. And there's probably people whose minds are sick enough today to continue to use those passages to justify slavery even now. But I'd like to say that just temporarily, let me read a couple of passages, one from Ephesians and one from Galatians, that I think speak to the matter. And we'll come back and deal directly another day with some of those very tough things that are said that make a distinction between people that are citizens of Israel back in Moses' time and shortly after, and people that were property people. Let's look at Ephesians chapter 2, starting with verse 11. Therefore remember that formerly you who are Gentiles by birth are called uncircumcised by those who call themselves the circumcision, which is done in the body by human hands. Verse 12, remember that at that time you were separate from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel and foreigners to the covenants of the promise, without hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you who once were far away have been brought near by the blood of Christ, for he himself is our peace. He is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier. You hear that? Those distinctions are gone. They're gone after Christ, through his demonstration on the cross, through the blood of Christ. Those distinctions are gone. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in his flesh the law with its commandments and regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. He came and preached peace to you who were far away, and peace to those who are near. For through him we have both access to the Father by one Spirit. Consequently, you are no longer foreigners, no longer strangers, fellow citizens with God's people and all members of this household, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Christ Jesus himself as the chief cornerstone. And then Galatians 3, verse 28, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female. We have some huge issues that have been wrestled with in trying to figure out whether we believe that it's true that there's no male nor female. And we've got some more issues ahead of us. I trust that the gospel will triumph and that we'll get there on those. For you are all one in Jesus Christ. You are all one. There's neither male nor female. There's neither Jew nor Gentile. There's neither slave nor free. Let's look, continuing our investigation of a Sabbath for the land. Let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 15, starting with verse 1. At the end of every 7 years, you must cancel debts. Are you prepared to cancel debts if people owe you money every 7 years? This is how it is to be done. Every creditor shall cancel any loan they have made to a fellow Israelite. They shall not require payment from anyone among their own people, because the Lord's time for canceling debts has been proclaimed. Listen to this. Those of you that identify as godly people, those of you that especially identify as followers of Jesus, please do not criticize anybody for just having different politics, for rooting for the wrong team of tails wagging the dog politically, because they're wanting people who are never going to be able to get out of debt to have some sort of mercy, some sort of forgiveness. If your heart won't go there, your heart needs some work. You may require, now this, again, we need to keep in mind Ephesians 2:11 through 20 and Galatians 3:28 as I read this, and we'll come back another day and handle some of these hard issues. Not during the pandemic. We'll do this stuff face to face. Verse 3 from Deuteronomy 15, you may require payment from a foreigner, but you must cancel any debt your fellow Israelite owes you. However, there need be no poor among you, for in the land your Lord, the Lord your God, is giving you to possess as your inheritance, he will richly bless you. If only you fully obey the Lord your God and are careful to follow all these commands I am giving you today. For the Lord your God will bless you as he has promised, and you will lend to many nations, but will borrow from none. You will rule over many nations, but none will rule over you. Okay? There's many things in that passage that we'll come back to on another day when we're dealing with less urgent matters. Jeremiah 34:13-14. That is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I made a covenant with your ancestors when I brought them out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I said, every 7th year, each of you must free any fellow Hebrews who have sold themselves to you. After they have served you 6 years, you must let them go free. Your ancestors, however, did not listen to me or pay attention to me. Deuteronomy 31:10-13. Moses commanded them at the end of every 7 years in the year for canceling debts during the Feast of Tabernacles. I think that's camp meeting. When all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God at the place he will choose, you shall read this law before them in your hearing. Assemble the people, men, women, and children, and the foreigners residing in your towns, so they can listen and learn to fear the Lord your God and follow carefully all the words of his law. Their children who do not know this law must hear it and learn to fear the Lord your God as long as you live in the land you are crossing the Jordan to possess. Nehemiah chapter 10 verse 31. When the neighboring peoples bring merchandise or grain to sell on the Sabbath, you will not buy from them on the Sabbath or on any holy day. Every 7th year you will forego working the land and will cancel all debts. And here we are, 2 Chronicles chapter 36 verse 20. He carried into exile to Babylon the remnant who escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him, and his successors unto the kingdom of Persia came to power. The land, listen to this now, the land enjoyed its Sabbath rests. All the time of its desolation it rested, until the 70 years were completed in fulfillment of the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah. Here's again that concept of the land being furloughed, having sabbatical. Isaiah 37:30 and 2 Kings 19:29, they say exactly the same words. So I can give you 2 references and only read one text. Isaiah 37:30 and 2 Kings 19:29 are identical wording. This will be the sign for you, Hezekiah. This year you will eat what grows by itself, and the 2nd year what springs from that. But in the 3rd year sow and reap, plant vineyards and eat their fruit. Leviticus 26:33-35 is the last passage I found on this concept. I will scatter you among the nations, and will draw out my sword and pursue you. Your land will be laid waste, and your cities will lie in ruins. Then the land will enjoy its Sabbath years. Interesting. When calamity came and the people were scattered and their economy broke down and a whole bit, the land was enjoying its Sabbath years. All the time that it lies desolate and you are in the country of your enemies, then the land will rest and enjoy its Sabbaths. All the time that it lies desolate, the land will have the rest it did not have during the Sabbaths you lived in it. Could it be that just for a few weeks now, our land around the world may enjoy its Sabbath that we have not been giving it while we've been moving full steam ahead? Let me ask my earlier question again. Can you imagine us having a discussion last summer, say in July, and suggesting having the whole world just take a break for a couple months to see if the heavenly body that is our earth could rest and heal and catch up a bit? Heal. since it's been getting overwhelmed and run down with our several illnesses all at once. What if this makes a real difference? What if we also, while on time out, accidentally discover how much healing the earth has been able to manifest in just a short little land Sabbath, and reassess our utter disregard for creation, reassess our role and responsibilities as stewards of this, our wonderfully created home? Man. Now, another gleam of light, another little bit of light somehow from way down the tunnel. This week, I've been hearing many unusual expressions of warm concern and affection and tenderness between people in the secular world for whom it seems to me so surprising and so hopeful. There's some sort of tenderness between journalists interviewing people with opposing views, even in many cases. Just guests that they would just be very matter of fact, just very transactional, business-like with. They're expressing things like they would to somebody that they really care for, really hoping that things are okay with them because there's a sober concern between fellow human beings. Man, and enormous cities are somehow miraculously finding actual rooms right now for their hundreds of homeless in motels, in hotels. San Francisco is rounding up homeless people, I read, and putting them in motels. This is surprising. Maybe it's hopeful. People are volunteering and begging for opportunities to help others, running errands for vulnerable people, sharing their food and equipment and hygiene supplies. This is not usually the way it happens. This is surprising, and it's hopeful. This in a world, until just a few weeks ago, increasingly celebrating cruelty, insolence, arrogant, belligerent, hateful rhetoric in the highest positions in government, industry, and even in religion, bringing psychopaths in as consultants to skyscraper boardrooms to help identify and eliminate the slightest remnants of empathy and compassion as costly impediments to corporate aspirations of brutality needed to achieve maximum spiteful reptilian competitive advantage. Just a few weeks ago, I suspect that this pandemic could actually increase empathy and compassion in an interesting and maybe even understandable way. We're wired funny. We're wired to care for other people, and we're wired to love other people. We have an interesting mix, an interesting blend of hormones that our endocrine system produces in our bodies, and an interesting cocktail of neurotransmitters that are making their way around our brain. One of the most interesting hormones that has really become sort of a rock star hormone is oxytocin. There are some speakers and scholars that have they've in the popular press and in the media they've labeled this the love hormone. And it's not really as loving as we're led to believe. Oxytocin is a hormone that is produced that helps to bring about uterine contractions when a mother is giving birth. It's associated also with lactation. Oxytocin is related to the letdown reflex, and at the same time, conveniently, it also when it's prevalent in our bodies, when it's circulating at higher than normal levels, it has a tendency to open our minds to accepting the people around us as part of our beloved inner circle, those that we just cherish the most. It bonds us to people. How appropriate that right after a mother gives birth and while she's breastfeeding, how appropriate and how wonderful it is that this hormone is present in a way that facilitates the strongest of human bonds. We also find that during human reproductive intimacy, that there's high levels of oxytocin. In fact, I've read a couple of reports that say that oxytocin has even been detected in semen. So that is a little bit of an interesting bonding mechanism that our Creator has given us. But there's another side of oxytocin. Oxytocin makes us bond to the people that we're close to, just like a mother, even like a mother bear. Now, if you see a bear, that's interesting. But if you see a mother bear with her cubs, you better just not be too interested. You better scoot right along and find distance and safety, because that bond that mother bear has with baby bear involves oxytocin. And oxytocin, while it tends to make us more and more loving and concerned for those we love, it makes us kind of want to become violent even in protecting what we love. It makes us more aggressive toward people who are not in our in-group. It makes us have heightened fear and aggression toward what we consider outsiders. And that's not a positive, loving aspect. We can see how that might be useful, maybe even to prevent epidemics historically, but it's too late for that. The way our human species is one group right now. Our human species is one human family, and there's not distance between us. The miles mean nothing now. They mean nothing. Our ideas are blended. Our families are blended. Our neighborhoods are blended. We are blends of so many different people groups personally. It's fascinating for me to look on the genetics, the commercialized, monetized genetic site that I sent DNA samples to, and to see how many things I am. You wouldn't know by looking at me what I am historically. We're all one human family now, and we're all one village. And that's why we can't just close off a city. We have to close ourselves in our homes. It used to work fine to just say, no, you can't come to our region, and that was adequate. And look what happened when people did travel across the ocean, and they brought horrible diseases like smallpox. Horrible. Anyway, that paradoxical action of oxytocin. One thing that tends to bind a group is into a mutually concerned in-group. We have found something that actually does make a group into a group is when they're together threatened by a common enemy. That has a tendency to have people get their backs together, circle the wagons, focus out at the same surrounding hordes, and say, yes, it's all us, those people whose shoulders I'm rubbing right now as we defend our village or our camp or our procession. But this time, what we're threatened by, it's not some nationality. It's not like during World War II, Germans or Japanese people, or it's not people from the Middle East. It's not people that are Muslims that are creating these strong out-group antisocial reactions as people feel threatened. It's not communists. I remember growing up hearing so many things about communists. It was fascinating to actually meet people that were from communist countries and find out that they actually were human beings that spoke and looked really similar to the rest of us. But I thought they'd have somehow swords instead of fingernails or something, like some sort of comic book nemesis. But it's not any group within the human family. The only enemy right now is a virus that has no feelings and presumably no soul. This is not a war in which rich, powerful oligarchs can heartlessly send other people's sons to die, while their own privileged loved ones sit in safety and luxury in their palaces and mansions. This enemy, this virus will kill blue-blooded, egomaniacal sociopaths and silver spoon-sucking narcissists as fast as it kills any gutter-drunk orphans or dirt-poor crackheads. We're all in this together. The whole human family is in this together. That is an advantage. In the science fiction movie that has become a tradition in my household, for many years we haul out that Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum classic, if you can call it a classic, Independence Day. In Independence Day, all the people of the earth end up under attack by a common extraterrestrial enemy, and it has a way of binding all the people in the world together. And I haven't really expected any flying saucers to come and bind us together, but I also haven't been thinking that much about the fact that something like this could play the role of something that's maybe from out of this world, because we don't have to divide the human family and figure out who the bad guys are right now. We're all one human family being threatened by exactly the same enemy, and maybe in a way that's never actually happened before. While we're this well networked and this well united into one village that's now being attacked together by the same enemy, maybe we can see something happen in our human species that will open doors to love, to receptivity to each other's ideas, maybe even to what we refer to as the gospel, in ways that it's never happened in human history. That's my prayer. Of course, my prayer involves the safety, the well-being of everybody that could contract this virus. Of course. But we cannot make that our entire focus. If our doors are closed and we are doing everything we can in our power individually and collectively to shorten this pandemic, then maybe we can also be looking at some of those rays of light that might be shining on our world that we can expect in the months and years following this unprecedented event. Maybe. Ezekiel 36:26. This is a promise that I claim, and I'd like to claim it for not just me, and not just our church family, and not just for our community in St. Helena and surrounding Napa Valley, but for our human family. A new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you, and I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh. So, what about me personally? What about you personally? And where is this morning's message? So what? Where's the so what for all of this? Well, 6 points that I offer as take-homes. Number 1, I will trust that God will work all things, including COVID-19 and weeks of sheltering at home, to my good, to your good, and to the good of our whole human family, and for the good of our, for now, our home, the earth. 2, I will regard this time out as a long overdue Sabbath. We are people who proclaim the Sabbath, and we've only been proclaiming the weekly Sabbath, and maybe that's appropriate, but maybe right now this is an extension of that Sabbath. Let's have some Sabbath, and let's make this a time like we make our weekly Sabbaths. Let's make this a time of special spiritual focus, a time where we focus on loving people, on learning more about how Jesus loved people. In that spirit, I'm going to begin in our daily or every other day, or maybe some days several times a day, but posting frequently encouragement on our church's Facebook page. I'm going to see how far I can get going through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and just reading. I'm just going to read, and I'm going to label it. So if you're saying I can read that on my own, I'll wait until there's some content I'm not familiar with. But I'm going to label. Now I'm going to be reading these passages, and I'm going to go through in the order of the 179 identifiable events in the life of Christ. I'm going to just take the first event, which is basically the prologue to. There's actually two Gospels that have a prologue, and then we'll look at the human ancestry of Jesus, and then I'll even read whose father was whose father was whose father, and the begats. I'll read it all, but I'll do it in order so that we cover every verse in the Gospels, at least as far as we get during this lock-in. And I'll go right through, and if there's places, though, where exactly the same thing appears, for instance, in Mark and Luke, or Matthew, Mark, and Luke, I won't read the redundant parts. I'll try to leave those together and just read the parts that are unique to each, so that it reads like one story. But that I think it's probably true that even though we might have less energy than we normally do, and we feel kind of slowed down, which is appropriate if this is a long Sabbath, I think that we probably could find time on our schedule to spend enough time together right here to read through all the Gospels together. Let's see how far we get, okay? So that was number 2. I'll regard this timeout as a long, long overdue Sabbath. And although it's far from long enough probably to completely heal me or you or the world, we'll take this medium-sized Sabbath very seriously. Number 3, I will pray for and cultivate softening replacement hearts of flesh near and far. I will never celebrate anyone, big or small, nor any of their stone-hearted actions if they are unkind, unloving, arrogant, cruel, narcissistic, selfish, tribalistic, nationalistic, or otherwise utterly unchristlike. I will repent of this, and I will invite you to repent of this. You know it's delicious when we see people that are well-deserved enemies getting it stuck right to them, having their own devices collapse on them, sort of like Haman in the book of Esther when he was hung on the gallows that he had created for Esther and Mordecai and their relatives. Man, it's delicious when we say, he got hung on his own gallows. I repent of that. I repent of the time I spent on YouTube looking at stupid criminal tricks and thinking that it was just tasty. And I will courageously and lovingly do better than this going forward. Number 4, I will recommit to my own part in responsible stewardship of our habitat and all its inhabitants. This is a time to realize that climate change is going to hurt many of the most vulnerable of our brothers and sisters in this world. We have been proving to ourselves that we are, in fact, capable and even inclined to care about the most vulnerable. This week, no, we will not blaspheme by calling ourselves followers of Jesus while favoring or even tolerating notions of sacrificing our old people or our weak people for the sake of our avarice-based economic structure. That is not okay for followers of Christ. No, our entire economic structure in the world, no matter what good comes of it, no matter what, is not worth us saying, let's just make choices so that we can sustain that prosperity and we'll just see what happens to the old and the weak. Not here. It is not necessary to have our enormous economic system be based on self-interest. That is not true. In fact, we can no longer put up with it. Use this time to realize how absurd it is to believe that the best way for everyone to get along is to have everyone caring for and fighting others for their own personal interest ahead of others' interests. It's insanity. It's ridiculous. I will use this extended Sabbath to sober up from this foul intoxication and to help others do the same. Number 5, I will look for my best contribution during this time of opportunity to reshape the world, to be more loving, more generous, kinder, more peaceful, more hopeful, more Christ-like, more receptive to hearing that Jesus Christ is going to come and write the final sentence in this last chapter of our Earth's history, and then with characters that are loving and some kind of heavenly economy that's based on meeting other people's needs with all our might for infinity in this world recreated. I look forward to sharing that world with you and with our human family from all over the world. Number 6, I will ask my Creator to use this extended Sabbath to, as Psalm 51 says, create in me a clean heart, and to renew a right spirit within me, to restore unto me the joy of salvation, and to uphold me with the free spirit, with his free spirit. Only then I will teach transgressors thy ways. Only then will sinners be converted. Deliver me, deliver us from blood guiltiness, O God, thou God of my salvation. And trust me, we each have a stake, just as consumers, in reprehensible system-wide blood guiltiness. People give their lives so that we can have doodads and potato chips and running shoes. And my tongue shall sing aloud of thy righteousness. O Lord, open thou my lips, and my mouth shall show forth thy praise. For thou desirest not sacrifice, else would I give it. Thou desirest not burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, thou wilt not despise. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. God bless you, family.